And we are live. I'm Two Turtle Tom, and welcome to my YouTube show every Thursday night at 8 p.m. I bring on a guest who keeps turtles and or tortoises. And tonight, we are going to talk to Jamie Sheffield. Jamie, how are you doing?
Doing quite well, Tom. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. We've known each other through Facebook for quite some time. You keep several species of tortoises. You do a lot of neat things like travel to places like England on these special trips that you do. Go down to Florida, visit your son. You have some great husbandry tips and tricks, and you've also worked with lots of different types of tortoises, including hingebacks, Holmes hingebacks. So welcome, everyone. We've got Phil Simpson on tonight, McZoo Exotic Pets. That's my friend Sean McZoo. Wes Coleman is here, Kyle McLaughlin, Matthew Hills, and Greg's Turtle Haven. He loves some Aldabras, and he says Craigslist is not where I would imagine getting one. So we're going to talk about that, but we're going to talk about some of Jamie's other stories before we get to that. Podrick's here and Sebastian. So, Jamie, how did you start with tortoises?
Well, I started with tortoises not long after my wife and I moved to New Hampshire. I came across a breeder online who I'd read some good reviews of and ordered a Redfoot, and the idea of it being shipped from Florida to New Hampshire via FedEx blew my mind, but it worked. And I fell in love with the tortoise Darwin, who I still live with. And then it was just sort of one thing led to another, sort of by accident. I accumulated more and more tortoises, which I assume is probably a pretty common story, that people start with one and then one turns into many.
Yeah, it's hard to have just one turtle or tortoise, and so many of us have so many, it's just kind of addictive. So you got that first one from a breeder, had it shipped to you. But one of the things we're going to talk tonight is about how you've acquired groups of some other turtles. One of those that I know you work with are the Russian tortoises. Our friend Matthew Hills loves Russian tortoises too. So tell us a little bit about your work with Russian tortoises and how you've assembled your group.
Well, it was sort of blind luck. I was looking on Craigslist for either like an animal plastics or vision cage enclosure, a larger one for my Redfoot, because as lots of people do, I didn't have a big enough starter enclosure for my Redfoot initially. So I was looking for a bigger one. And in using my keyword searches, I started noticing that there were a number of people who were looking to rehome, or sometimes less kindly sort of offload their tortoises. And one guy was quite close to me with a Russian tortoise that he'd lived with for a while. And I did some research, and it seemed as though I had the capabilities and the space to take care of this Russian. And so I drove down, and this guy had been living with the Russian tortoise, who he called Smirnov, for I think 20 years or 22 years.
Wow.
In a 15-gallon Rubbermaid tote.
Wow.
With wood chips on the bottom. And because these tortoises are so darn tough, the tortoise was doing okay. He wasn't doing great, but he was doing okay. But I spent a lot of time giving him some extra soaks, giving him lots of outside time because it was summer, and the right food. And he is happy. He's the only male. Since then, I've accumulated 4 more Russians, that are all female. So I've got sort of a 1-4 creep that lives with me.
Cool.
And 3 of them came from Craigslist in the local environment. And one of them came to me. A woman got in touch with me who'd heard about me, I think on Tortoise Forum Online, or maybe she got in touch with me on Facebook. But it was, she lives in Virginia, and this tortoise had sort of dug its way out of the mud and muck in a local park after a thaw, covered with snow and mud and ice, and was dragging itself around the park.
Oh, wow.
And someone saw it and she said, "Do you think you could take it in?" And so she mailed it up to me. And Persephone is one of my favorite tortoises, at least partly because of her sort of origin story, that she started out, I assume she probably escaped from her previous owner and had spent at least one winter, but maybe 2 or more in that park in Virginia. And, Virginia is within the Russian tortoise's capability, so they could survive that.
Yeah, that's just amazing. When you get one of these new tortoises from Craigslist, I'm always impressed with your diets and the record keeping that you show, and often you kind of show a picture of an animal maybe when you first got it versus now, and some of the hingebacks that you've had. You've really kept us updated on the forums and things like that. What could you tell us a little bit about your philosophy and your processes when you take a turtle in, or a tortoise in this case? What are your goals for that animal? It's pretty impressive what I see you do.
Well, I think actually, not to shine you on too much, but
Sure.
we got to know each other through a rescue
That's right.
Holmes hingeback.
That's right.
And this one was off of Craigslist, and it was someone who'd picked them up at a reptile expo and didn't really know what to do with them, as I didn't, but you gave me some great advice. And, the first thing I do is work pretty hard to keep them quarantined from the other tortoises, because you never know what sort of bugs they might be bringing in with them, parasites and such. But also, I tend to start with a, lengthy warm soak, scrub with a toothbrush, examine carapace, plastron, head and neck, their feet, their toenails, give them a full-on once-over. And like with this Holmes that we met over, he was decidedly underweight. He felt light as a feather when I would pick him up. And you mentioned that a possible thing that might help him would be ridiculously long soaks.
Yeah.
And so with that one, for I guess a month or 6 weeks, I was soaking him between 4 and 10 hours a day of warm soaks in either just water or water with some baby food, and to get them up to speed. But I do like to check. I have a health sheet that I use with all of them, and it's pretty much the same. You won't be able to see it really, but I use I check like weight and the things I mentioned, the carapace, the plastron, the legs and the skin, and I do it on a monthly basis, and mostly to sort of establish hopefully a trend, so I can see from month to month, is its weight staying the same? Is it gaining a little bit? Are problems that I noticed when I first picked it up improving, or at least stabilized, hopefully? And, one of the things that I use on that record keeping sheet is I weigh them and it's sort of a density formula with I think it's called the Donahue ratio.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing that right. Which is scute length times 0.191, and you figure out sort of their target body weight and how close they are to that. And I don't know that that's a perfect measure for any tortoise, but if you do that measurement month after month, you can see if they're gaining relative weight or losing relative weight.
Yeah.
So I think tracking the tortoises over time is a really useful tool that I appreciate a lot.
How did you develop this system? Do you have experience with healthcare or veterinary care?
Well, not really. I think I worked at a zoo one summer a
Okay.
while ago in my life,
Mhm,
and I loved it. But I think
mhm,
mostly I just like to be organized and try to nerd my way through a problem. And so if I think, well, I could weigh this tortoise, but what does that do me if I don't know what it weighed, a week from now or a month from now?
mhm,
So that led me to make up that chart and things like that. And then
mhm.
I just try to develop systems, especially because now I think I'm living with 14 tortoises. And so, I mean, you live with a number of tortoises and turtles yourself.
Absolutely.
If you
Yes.
don't have systems, your life is chaos and it'll take forever to take care of them.
That's right. On my behind me is one of my systems for what I need to do each day.
Mhm.
Those columns are a whole list of groups of animals that I need to do certain things to. So, and I think the bottom line is that you've been very successful. You've done two Holmes Hingebacks that I know of that you found on Craigslist. They were both, they had different issues. They were different ages, but yeah, you were able to nurse both of those animals back to health, and
Yep.
then eventually find groups for them to be with. Right?
Yes, I was able to find down in the sort of south in both cases. One, I guess, Louisiana, and then maybe in Florida.
Okay.
Um, People who were working with Holmes Hingebacks. And I figured that made some sense because they are, a threatened species in the wild. So they should be with someone who really knows how to take care of them and is interested in breeding them because who knows,
Hmm.
20 years from now, there may not be any in the wild, or
Hmm.
50 years from now. It's
Yeah,
hard to tell.
it's very possible for
Yeah.
sure. On the other side, the Russians, you've put together a little group. Is your intent to try to breed those Russians?
Uh, Chili, who's the male, has gotten together and he's quite enthusiastic. His favorite is Persephone, that one that came from the Virginia park, and he will seek her out, 9 times out of 10, and mates with her. But they live separately most of the time because otherwise, I think he'd exhaust himself and drive them nuts.
Wow.
But there haven't been any eggs yet, so I don't know if his life before he came to live with me was rough enough that he's maybe sterile,
Sure.
or just if he's shooting blanks, or
Yeah. 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 With
because
one male, it's hard to say.
yeah, the females all seem very healthy, and they
Hmm.
even sometimes look like, a couple times I've been very excited because they look like they're digging nest holes, or they're sort of
Mm.
backing up, and I keep hoping to see eggs, but I never do with them. But I'm hopeful.
Well, Matthew Hills is in the chat, and he is our Russian tortoise expert. So,
Mhm.
Matthew's here. Tony Monahan just joined us. Tony's working on a book about where to go see turtles and tortoises in public places across the country. Patrick Lee is here. Podrick's here. Ralph Till joined us. And Krista, I believe, also joined us in the chat. And Harlan. Harlan's from South America. He's one of my YouTube buddies. So, well, Jamie, you and I, we share many things in common. One of which is to troll Craigslist for turtles and tortoises.
Yep.
And I I am not actively adding to my collection, and so I do look locally for animals. But about, I don't know, 2 3 years ago, I would routinely browse nationwide through Craigslist ads,
Mhm.
looking for hingebacks, but sometimes just doing tortoises and looking at all the tortoises all over the place. And at one point, there were these fake Aldabra tortoise ads on every Craigslist in the country. You'd see the same photos over and over again. It was a total scam, and it was just, kind of ridiculous joke that someone would be like getting rid of their, Aldabra tortoise.
Yep.
Um, and it was laughable. I mean, it was a joke. In fact, I stopped doing it because it was so laughable. I'm like, is Craigslist really an option anymore if this is just all spammy? So, I hadn't really seen that lately, but I was surprised on Facebook. I think is where I found your story of
Mhm.
finding a baby Aldabra on
Yes.
Craigslist that you have actually in your possession. So tell us the story.
Well, like you, I generally do when I do a Craigslist search, I do it for 200 miles from my zip code because I figured that I'm willing to drive 200 miles for a find. And within 200 miles, and this Aldabra tortoise showed up, and
Sure,
I
it
was
did. Yeah.
positive I'd seen a couple that were obvious scams, a couple that I had actually been, because you want to believe it, so you sort of can psych yourself into it.
Yeah.
But this guy, I reached out and he got back in touch with me and didn't seem overtly scammy. And then I think I weirded him out by I said, "Could you take a picture of the tortoise with a teaspoon?" And he's like,
Ah.
"What?" And he said, "No, just, so that it's a random item that you don't have a
Sure.
picture of it." And
Yeah.
he did, and he sent the picture. So I knew
Oh.
that he actually had the tortoise. And we talked more and more. And, for various reasons, including health, but also his space. And I think maybe just misjudging what an Aldabra tortoise was and what the requirements were. He realized that he couldn't provide this thing the home that it needed.
Wow.
And so he lived in New Jersey, which was a bit of a haul for me.
Yeah.
Um,
You're up in New
and
Hampshire.
yes, and I made the trip still probably 30 or 40% sure that I'd get there and there'd be some sort of scam or that I'd get mugged and whatever.
Oh,
Have my
what
car
was
stolen.
did you tell your family? Like, yeah, I'm gonna go try to get an Aldabra tortoise down in New Jersey.
Oh yeah, my wife thought I was crazy. And my son's just like, text me the location before you go into this guy's house. And
Yeah.
yeah, but it
Wow.
it turned out that it was for real, that it was a situation that would have been untenable for the Aldabra. Um, it already wasn't great. Dozer's living with me, and he's in my office, and he's got some pyramiding because he was raised in sort of suboptimal conditions. But he also had, when I picked him up, he had some scratches on him, and the guy said, "Oh yeah, my cat got a hold of him the other
Ah.
day." And I'm like, "Oh God, don't tell me about that." But so, and the guy lived in a trailer with no yard, no grass, and literally you could reach out and touch the next trailer through the window in his own trailer.
Wow.
Like they were lots that were like 6 or 8 feet wide.
Oh my god.
Um,
Wow.
so I don't know what, there was no long-term plan, I think, with that.
Yeah. I don't think there was a short-term plan either. It sounds like.
No,
Wow.
and I just think, I mean, because sort of part and parcel with an Aldabra is, they don't all get to be 500 pounds, but it
Sure.
could get to be 500
Yeah.
pounds.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, it seems like there should be more planning at the front. But
I totally understand, the desire to kind of just, not give us too much detail, but, was it a reptile show purchase, or, how does someone happen upon an Aldabra or not quite realize exactly what they're getting into? Did he know it was going to be a giant tortoise? Did he think he might be able to have it in the future? And I
I think
understand if
I think maybe he thought that it would be the impetus to him moving,
sure.
or
Yeah.
that he'd change
Yeah.
his life to make the
Yeah.
tortoise work, or
Yeah. Yeah. And
something.
he might have wanted one all his life, and who knows what the opportunity was to acquire one. So
Yeah.
Patrick says some people have more money than sense.
I
Um,
100% agree.
so
Yeah.
very interesting. I've never, I've seen the Aldabras at zoos and things like that. What's it like to have a hatchling?
Well, the thing is, the hatchling is very much like, it's sort of midway between when my Redfoot was a hatchling and a Russian as a hatchling,
Yeah.
in that the
Interesting.
diet is pretty similar to
Sure.
what the Russians like, and the environmental conditions are pretty similar to what the Redfoot likes, and so none of it is really new yet.
Mm-hmm.
Although just to test it out, because I'd seen pictures and videos of Aldabras swimming between islands in the Seychelles. One of the times when I gave him a soak early on, I put in an extra 2 inches of water, which was enough to float him. And he dog paddled better than any tortoise I live with.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
amazing,
Oh, that is
how
so cool.
well he swims. And
Wow.
he just explores paddling around.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah.
How long do you think you will work with him?
Well, I think where I am now is that I think probably longer than the Holmes Hingebacks that I worked with, just because I'd love to have him grow a little bit and keep him while I've still got space that's conducive to his positive growth. And I say him, I don't know if it's a he or a she.
Sure.
But I was thinking, that it might be a case of me keeping Dozer until he's volleyball sized or soccer ball sized,
Yeah.
something along those. That's a size that I'm used to working with, and
Uh-huh.
is pretty comfortable for me. And I think still is either, if I find the right person, when I find the right person, either shippable or easy to drive with a creature that size. And I could, maybe co-generate with a trip down to visit my son if the
Yeah.
person's in Florida or Louisiana or whatever.
Yeah.
And
That's so cool.
but so I don't think of him as a forever tortoise, like the Holmes were not. But I think I'd like to live with him for a year or so
Sure.
and see how
Oh,
that
that's cool.
goes.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That is a really cool opportunity, right? It would just be very difficult for me personally to buy an Aldabra and then move on from it. But yeah, it's kind of a gift, I think, maybe just kind of
It
handed
is.
to you. Yeah. Wow. That's super cool. Do you, so Dozer is his name, right?
Yeah.
Or the turtle's name.
The turtle's name.
Krista says, "I'm glad you're able to rescue Dozer, and sure he ends up in the right hands." Yeah, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
So, Jamie, this is a great story, and you tell stories. You're an author. Could you
Yep.
tell me a little bit about your writing? How long have you been a writer? Is that your profession?
I've sort of eased into writing and felt I published my first book about 10 years ago now. and I wrote a series of mystery novels,
Ah.
and then a couple of collections of short stories, short fiction.
Huh?
And then probably 2 years ago, I started writing. I thought I would try something new. I was inspired by the tortoises, in particular, my Russian tortoise, Chili the grumpy tortoise.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
And so
cool.
I made up a series of children's books,
Ah.
and Darwin, the Redfoot that I live with,
Uh-huh.
and then Aretha, the tortoise convinced she was too big, which is the Minoria emisferae that I live with, the Burmese black mountain tortoise. And I write these stories. They're for children, and they're designed to be issue ones about, the one about Chili. He's a grumpy tortoise, but the idea is that maybe that it can spark a discussion of why children are grumpy and why it's okay to be grumpy sometimes, and ways to talk about being grumpy with the other people in your life. Or the Aretha book about the Burmese black mountain tortoise. She's she was one of the last tortoises to come here except for Dozer, and quickly outgrew all of them. And so in her book, she's a little bit ashamed of how big she is. And I know
Ah.
that that's an issue for lots of kids in school, and they can feel bullied or just sad and not good about themselves. And so the book is a little bit about her talking with the other tortoises she lives with about how it makes her feel and what it's like to feel that she's too big.
Oh, wow. That is really cool.
And then recently, I wrote a new novel, which isn't coming into
Ah.
focus too well, but The World Beneath the World. And it's another mystery novel because I love
Oh,
mysteries.
cool.
It's most of what I read, so it's most of what I write. But the sort of crime fighting, the detectives also run and live in a house that has an attached greenhouse that has a a creep of rescue sulcatas
Oh,
that they pick
wow.
up off of Craigslist.
Oh, I love it.
And it's a part of their crime fighting.
Oh, wow.
The tortoises get involved in.
Where can we order a copy of these books if we want to, and if everyone
Now,
wants to?
bookstores, your
Okay.
local bookstore should be able to order them.
Okay.
Um, Also, the 400-pound gorilla, Amazon,
Sure.
has them all.
Great.
And so, yeah, both those places. Or I have a website and I send signed copies to people.
Fantastic.
But,
Is that jamiesheffield.com?
yep.
Excellent.
And if you want, I can
Yeah.
sign it by Stephen King or James Patterson. Or
Um, just a quick side note, my wife grew up in Maine. She used to work at a little bookstore in a place called Norway, Maine, and Stephen King would just drop in every once in a
That
while.
is so cool.
So, I can only imagine. So, well, you've written a lot of these books. You're publishing them yourself.
Yep, I published them through Amazon's Kindle desktop publishing,
Okay.
which has been a great boon. It sort of was lucky that it coincided with when I finished writing my first book.
Mm-hmm.
And I've, this latest one, I did ship around to a bunch of agents and publishers,
Mm-hmm.
and I got some good notes and some just thanks but no thanks.
Sure.
But the truth is, I really like telling stories,
Huh?
and I don't know that I'm ever gonna make my living being a writer.
Yeah.
I'm an academic advisor at a local college,
Uh-huh.
and so this is an easy way to publish my books and have people read them all over the world. When I
Absolutely.
published my first book, I sold a copy and got an email from someone who read it in Australia within 2 weeks of hitting the publish button.
Wow.
And that just made my year. Yeah.
That had to go over on an airplane, I would have, I think,
I think
depending where it's
nowadays
shipped
they
from.
they print it essentially from like a copy machine
On
almost.
demand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So one of the things that I really encourage keepers to do is to
Mhm.
share their knowledge. What advice do you have to some of the more advanced keepers that listen to the show about putting together their thoughts and ideas, their methods about a particular species or a turtle or tortoise? What's that process like to imagine an idea, write it, publish it into a book? Do you do it all yourself? Do you have any tips for people if they want to do something similar?
Yes. I think if you feel that you've got a story to tell or knowledge to share, you 100% should do that. And it's never solely a solo project. You need other eyes to look at your work, and, you know, sending your material, the tortoise world, I have found people to be remarkably helpful and welcoming and open armed. And I think if you sent your material to other people to look at, you could get it proofread, and people might have ideas that you missed about how to share your information. Or, boy, it would be great to have a chapter on nutritional supplements, or what to do if the animals get these 3 most common ailments, or that. And to reach out to someone who's gone through the process. One of the things that I'd love to do, and I'd offer anybody who's listening or watching, drop me an email if you have questions about the process, and I would be happy to help insofar as I'm able. My email is jsheffield@gmail.com. You can send me an email asking me questions about any part of the publishing process, and I'd be happy to help you if it's something I know about.
Fantastic.
Because I think more good books,
Yeah.
especially about tortoises, would be a great thing for the world.
Have you tried keeping any turtles?
I have not. And I think it's because of the aquatic nature. And I worried about, I guess maybe I worried about diseases, or I worried about, I don't know. It seems so
Salmonella bacteria.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, they are quite different. Yeah, I keep I keep box turtles. They're kind of like tortoises, and I have one aquatic turtle.
Yep.
They're just different, have different requirements. So,
Mm-hmm.
very, very interesting. Well, Jamie, do you have anything else? Any words of wisdom, knowledge, experience gained that you'd like to share with our audience tonight?
Well, honestly, I don't think that I do. I'm very grateful to you and to lots of other people in the turtle world for all the advice people have been so willing to give to someone who asks questions. And I think if I had a piece of advice, it would be ask questions and listen to people who know more than you do. It's easy to shut down, and it's easy to get information that is maybe questionable. And so I think maybe I don't know how to give good advice on vetting the information you find online. That's always a tough situation. But I think asking questions and listening to smart people's advice is a good way to do right by your tortoises and turtles.
Excellent. I was on a live last night with Sean and was asked about chameleons, about the tortoise and turtle community, and whether or not it's growing. And one of the things I said, I'm like, well, people have been keeping turtles and tortoises for a long time, but I feel like we're in this era where we're really starting to zero in on what is really good husbandry for a turtle and a tortoise. And it just makes me smile when I see healthy hatchlings grow over time and see people being successful. So,
Yeah.
Jamie, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone in the chat. Um, I am headed to South Carolina beginning tomorrow morning. So next week, I'm going to join you from South Carolina. Matthew Hills will be with me, and we're going to try to get a guest from South Carolina. So if you know who I'm talking about, let me know if you can help get Dan the Turtle Man on, and we can talk about Diamondback Terrapin. So that's next week. Jamie, thank you so much again. It's been wonderful. It's been so good to finally talk. And I hope when I'm in New England again, we can get together and I can meet Dozer. So that would be great. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening, everyone.